It's no secret that a serious discussion's in order about the buildings used by students in Boston's public schools. A recent audit by consultants with the McKinsey Group estimates the school district has an excess capacity of about 40%. But some parents are questioning the report and voicing distrust over the planning process for school facilities. One of them is our guest, a member of Quality Education for Every Student, or QUEST, Kevin Murray. Thank you very much for being with us, Kevin.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I know this report was made public in one sense around December 18th last year in a summary from the city, but you, in your group, you went to the source. You tried to get more. So talk about just trying to get that to happen.
Well, I think you may recall that the original news about the report came out during the holiday season almost a year and a half ago now. And we were very anxious because we believe there is a serious plan to consolidate the Boston public schools, some of which is publicly talked about, some of which is less publicly talked about. So we were very anxious to see this report and assumed it would come out in due time. It usually takes a little while for such things to be released. And then it didn't come out, and it didn't come out. And we began to think that the city's sort of repackaging of the report, which they put on the website, was going to be all we were going to see, which didn't have any hard numbers, no discussion of the methodology used by McKinsey, and no assessment of the recommendations that we believed. I mean, any consultant report that you're paying $660,000 for is going to come to you with some recommendations. So we thought it was important that the public see all of that. So when it became clear to us that maybe it wasn't happening, and certain information from the report was starting to come out, right? We felt it was important to get access to the entire report, so we began a formal process which included legal interventions to eventually get access to the report.
So what did you find that you didn't know before?
Well, we found that we did know before that they were suggesting that there was a capacity of 93,000 students in the schools. We were very anxious to see how they had gotten to that number, because that really conflicted with our understanding of the results of a BPS report that was put out less than a year before the McKinsey report was completed. So we found that there was no methodological section in the report. There was no description at all of how they'd arrived at this number, which we felt was very important or sort of noteworthy. And then there were some pretty direct recommendations about what the city should do based on the information that was provided in the report. For example, on slide 111, and the report is in the form of essentially a PowerPoint-like presentation. It's not a text report. But in slide 111 of the report, it said, BPS could consider saving money and improve the system by consolidating schools to fill each school to capacity. Theoretically, BPS could close 30 to 50 schools of the 126 in the system. That's my addition. This could allow BPS to capture 50 to 80 million annually in operation expense savings and a potential revenue from 120 to 200 million in property sales or long-term leases of the buildings, which leads us into another interesting part of the report. So there's a lot of statements like that are direct recommendations about how the city should proceed based on a report for which the methodological basis is not provided.
Well, I've certainly heard the mayor say at least once, and maybe he said it more often, that we have this capacity for 93,000 and we have an enrollment of 57,000. That sounds like quite a gap.
It does sound like quite a gap. And I think probably almost everybody in the city has remembered exactly the same two numbers that you have, because that was one piece of the report. As closely held as the report was, somehow that number slipped out and it became sort of commonly known. So just one other interesting use of that report, it began to slip into public discourse, not only on the part of the mayor, no less an expert on the public schools than Paul Grogan of the Boston Foundation said in April, the report notes that Boston has roughly 93,000 seats in its public schools, but only 57,000 students. The overcapacity is the real source of the financial distress that's occurring. And this is going on while you probably remember, there was quite a pitched discussion about the budget in the Boston Public Schools this year. And the counter narrative was that the reason for the budget problems of the Boston Public Schools was this explosive overcapacity. And Mr. Grogan was feeding that narrative with this kind of statement. This was happening in the media almost every day during this period.
Of course, one other consequence of this is that if there is a lot of overcapacity, here you are, you're a parent, you're worried about budget cuts. Well, don't you want to do something about the excess capacity?
I certainly do. I want us to understand exactly what the capacity of the Boston Public Schools is and look at the different options we have for addressing that issue. The Boston Public Schools themselves, as I mentioned before, in late 2013 came out with its own report that did find excess capacity in the Boston Public Schools of something on the order of 10%. And it broke it down, saying that the exam schools, the three high schools, are actually over capacity at this point. They're at 101% capacity. Middle schools are at 88%, and the rest of the schools slightly over 90, bringing us to an overall capacity right around 90.
Now, I went to schools in the system where there were classrooms that could have held as many as 36 students, at least at one time. But you also have classes today, especially if you have students with learning disabilities, and you probably in practice should have maybe 10, maybe fewer, maybe a little bit more.
That's right. That's why you cannot. The methodology that we believed was used in this report was a square footage methodology, which is the extremely sophisticated manner of a method of just determining how many square feet there are in a school. And then based on your sense of what the teacher to student ratio should be, you can arithmetically arrive at a capacity for that school. We can't prove that because it doesn't say that in the report, but we believe that's the methodology that was used, which doesn't take into account the situation you just talked about. It doesn't take into account many situations that exist in schools. So the BPS put out its own report, and now the BPS has actually begun a process of involving different community groups and a large cross-section of people in a facilities process that's going to extend, I think, for most of the entirety of this year.
When the city announced this report, they put some qualifiers out there saying this is not to be taken as a set of recommendations. And the mayor says, look, we're not just trying to shut buildings down, we're trying to replace old buildings, outmoded buildings with new buildings. So this is not all about just, downsizing. That's
right. And there certainly are facilities problems in the Boston Public Schools, I repeat. And nobody's more concerned about that than parents. I believe you've reported here on the situation of lead in the water in the Boston Public Schools. That's an indicator of the kind of facilities that our children are going to school in. So nobody's more concerned than we are, or parents in general, about what kind of facilities our students are going to. We just want to make sure that the claims of high excess capacity are not used to serve another agenda about consolidating the schools that's only tangentially related to really serious concerns about the quality of the facilities.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about some space being used for charter schools, or at least being some form of cohabitation with charter schools. But you also mentioned in this report some possibilities of taking school buildings in areas where the real estate is very valuable. Hey, if you sold Boston Latin, imagine how much money you can get from Harvard.
Right. And how about Snowden?
Oh.
Or Boston Arts Academy. I don't want to name any schools for fear of putting them on somebody's list. But that's another thing. If you really should look at this McKinsey report. Some of the slides are really quite revealing. But one of them says it offers a plan for closing 30 schools, a hypothetical idea of how to do it. You could take 10 very low-performing schools. Where would those be? What schools would those be? You and I can probably come to a list pretty quickly. You can take 10 schools that have high real estate value. Right, so there's a high value added in the sale for the city, and you can take 10 schools where the facility is particularly inefficient, and you can put together a package of 30 schools that makes sense to close. And that speaks, the report goes on at great length about the real estate bonanza to be had in selling Boston Public Schools. And maybe there is a real estate bonanza to be had. To me, that's not the function of either the city or the public school system to realize gains because real estate in the city happens to be particularly hot.
Well, people are going to have to stay tuned to this for a while, so if they want to know what Quest is putting out, you've got a Facebook page they can go to?
We do. If they search Quest BPS on Facebook, you'll get to our Facebook page, which we found to be the best way to share. These documents are on there. You can get access to the McKinsey report. And you'll soon, in addition to the McKinsey report, we got a bunch of ancillary information that we think is very important to contextualize what was going on, what was the thinking, what was the planning at the city during the time that this report was commissioned, and during the time that you may remember there was a sort of pitch discussion between some members of Quest and the mayor about whether or not there was a plan to close schools last year. And so by looking at some of this information, you can see what was actually going on in the planning process of the city while we were being told, absolutely, there's no plan to close schools.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
From Quest, Kevin Murray.
Thanks.
Up ahead, we'll hear about this Sunday's Walk for Peace, and we'll have the report from Dorchester with Bill Forey.